Hello, this is Douglas Eby, author of the Creative Mind series of sites. This episode is an excerpt from a longer podcast or video. See the notes for details and links to resources.
Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Gibson, your conference co-host. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Cathleen King, a physical therapist who's passionate about teaching neuroscience-based practices targeting the brain and nervous system. Her focus is to help people with self-healing from chronic illness and trauma patterns. Dr. Cathleen King, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I know that you have some experience with debilitating health problems and PTSD. So why does nervous system work seem to help people, including yourself, regardless of what kind of diagnosis they have?
Good question. It took me a long time to realize that there was a common denominator with all of my different diagnoses and symptoms. And that common denominator was that the autonomic nervous system is playing a role into it. And if the autonomic nervous system is playing a role, that means that my brain and my limbic system and my hypothalamus are in charge. And so I began a quest to learn about how doing brain retraining and nervous system regulation could influence my immune system, my digestive system, my endocrine system, all of the things that I was struggling with. And I found that a lot of people were getting help doing practices for that. So it made sense to me. I began using these kind of practices and it started to turn my health around. And then I started working with people, teaching them the same thing with all sorts of different diagnoses. It's been a real cornerstone for a lot of people dealing with chronic illness to learn how to self-regulate their own biology. We understood a lot of this. I'm a physical therapist. And so my background was I worked with chronic pain. And we know that emotions and trauma and all of that deal with can lead to chronic pain because the brain processes pain. I didn't realize for so many years that the brain also regulates the immune system and digestive system. I knew that, but I didn't know that it would affect my very real Lyme disease and mold toxicity and chronic fatigue syndrome and all the things. And so, eventually my education came back full circle of using brain retraining techniques that I use for chronic pain to use them for chronic illness, again, affecting trauma and chronic stress. And sure enough, my symptoms started to disappear over time. And so I think it's a pretty empowering approach if you're dealing with chronic illness because you can affect your autonomic nervous system and you can get symptom relief by doing this.
I want to come back to two things you said, but first, we skipped over pretty quickly autonomic nervous system, and I know what that is, and you know what that is, but maybe people at home might not know what it is. So I'd love it if you could back up and just be, all right, what is our autonomic nervous system?
Yeah, so our autonomic nervous system, it helps to control all of the organ function of our body. It's a massive communicator between the brain and the body. It's a feedback loop. It helps to regulate your heart rate, your breathing, your digestion, so it's a master control switch for the body, and it needs to function well for us to rest, digest, and repair after we've had an injury, an illness, or a massive stress. If we are in chronic stress, the autonomic nervous system can shift gears and it can get stuck in a fight or flight reaction. When that happens, it sends the signal to the body. It says, we don't have the reserves to digest our food right now and to detoxify because we have to deal with this threat. And so the body will shift its function based on the signaling of the autonomic nervous system. So it would make sense that if you wanted to signal safety, rest, digest, detoxify, you would target the autonomic nervous system in a variety of ways to help your body self-heal. And that's what I learned how to do.
And it's fascinating too, because when we think about the autonomic nervous system, it's like digestion and breathing and, our blood flowing and all these things that we don't have to think about, even though our brain is communicating and taking part in all of those systems. We're not actively thinking about them. And so it's almost counterintuitive at first when you hear about it to think, wait a minute, all these things that are happening automatically, I can engage in order to actually make changes in the way that my body is processing both my thoughts, feelings, behaviors, things like that. So how do those two things match up that we can control something that we're not controlling in order to make ourselves kind of feel some relief
Yeah.
and healing?
Okay, so you cannot control exactly how you're digesting food right now, but you can control your breath pattern. Your breath pattern sends signals to your hypothalamus that sends signals all the way through the body that end up causing your digestion to come more online. It doesn't seem like we can directly control our heart rate, but again, controlling our breath pattern, controlling our sense of safety or threat, it will trickle down to controlling the heart rate. So we can consciously self-regulate our own biology. And it might be a downstream effect, but we still can have that effect over time.
Absolutely. And, so many people, it's so hard at first. And I remember when I first started my trauma healing journey that everybody wanted to talk to me about breath work, and I wanted to punch all those people in the nose, honestly. Right.
Yeah.
But it does, once you create enough safety, and that doesn't have to be the first avenue, but it's like we're creating enough safety for ourselves to have just a little bit of a margin of play, of experimentation, of curiosity in these tools that we can build over time. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do an hour breathwork session when you're feeling completely activated and dysregulated in order to get any sort of relief.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I had a therapist working with me when I had all my chronic conditions. And he's like, if you'd learn to regulate your nervous system, a lot of your Lyme disease symptoms would go away. And I also wanted to punch him in the face. And I was like, you don't understand. I can't just regulate my nervous system. Do you know what I'm dealing with in here? It's like a full-on war. The deal is he was right. And yeah, it was a very sequential process that I had to go through, a journey that was slow and incremental that I had to learn to walk to come out of the trauma responses, to feel stable enough to even do breath work or to even understand why breathing would make a difference in the experience I was having in my body. It seems so counterintuitive. So I get it. I understand that it's a lot when you're first starting out in the trauma healing journey. This doesn't make sense, actually. It just doesn't. When there's a tiger chasing you in the room, you're not going to be like, I'm going to stop and breathe and do some brain retraining. I'm going to think about what's good in my life. Every instinct in you is fighting against that. It's like, no, there's a tiger we got to run from. Like, this stuff is silliness.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it takes a bit of a quantum leap to turn and face the tiger and realize, oh, okay, I'm not going to run from this. And I am going to breathe and do these things in the face of this stress. But it's a journey to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody was ever safe from a tiger with a gratitude journal, right? So it's, although maybe
Yeah.
throw it at it. And you spoke to something that's just so key and that we overlook sometimes. Lots of people, they can remember when they began, and then they remember how they feel after they implemented a solution. But it's like nobody talks about the tiny increments on the way there, and they can be very, very tiny. And it happens. I don't know about your experience, but it was like, it felt like the beginning took 60 years. And then once you get the hang of it, all of a sudden it kind of starts to snowball, and you're like, the relief starts coming more quickly, and your recognition of symptoms or triggers or activations comes more quickly. And so do your tools and the way we can forget to talk about how agonizing the beginning is.
It really is. It's like trying to swim upstream initially because you're literally going against all of the biology. You're going against all your neurotransmitters, your hormones, all the instincts. You are having to make a very, very conscious effort. So it requires a lot of will and choice initially to get on this path of healing trauma.
And you're so poised as a physical therapist to kind of bridge these create bridges for an understanding for people. As someone who, I literally started physical therapy about a year ago, I had an embarrassing incident where I fell in front of a fire truck full of firemen while I was trying to alert them to an emergency. And that was like my physical wake up call. I was like, okay, it's time to get back in your body and start doing some work. And then I suffered a series of injuries. I tore a calf muscle and I injured my shoulder, right? But while you're in physical therapy, like, I became one of those really annoying, irritating people that all I wanted to talk about was my physical therapy and all of the parallels and analogies I could make to trauma healing and all Right? It's like, it's the same. I wouldn't like shame myself about my calf injury, and I wouldn't not take my time and allow myself to heal and have, measured expectations about what I can do when I can do it, and also recruit in an expert to help me on that healing journey that knows a little bit more about me than my own healing, even though my knowledge is important. So I'm wondering kind of what analogies you've drawn from your experiences, both in healing and as a physical therapist,
Yeah.
to help kind of bridge those gaps for people in their understanding.
Yeah. Ironically, when I first started teaching nervous system work and brain retraining, my physical therapy board was like, "Is this really evidence-based, practices? Are you practicing outside the scope?" And I'm like, "Our nervous system is a type of muscle, and it makes sense that it would have to be rehabilitated and have a form of physical therapy to get it stronger." And so, yeah, I would say that this is physical therapy for your brain and your nervous system. It's just kind of a paradigm shift in how we're using it. We'll do these same practices for a stroke recovery because, oh, you've had a very real neurological injury. We didn't see trauma as a very real neurological injury, which it is. So, yeah, I think physical therapy for the brain, physical therapy for your vagus nerve, getting it stronger and more toned to have more resilience. It's just like going to the gym and lifting weights. You start slow. You don't just bench press, 300 pounds. You start with just little weights. It's the same thing with the nervous system. You're carefully toning the vagus nerve. You're carefully getting your breath work pattern synced up. You're carefully targeting the limbic system so that we don't blow your circuits of doing too much too soon, just like in a gym membership or a gym workout.
Thanks for listening. See the Creative Mind post for this podcast episode with links to resources and other material.